Race relations theories, implications for sport management. Women and minorities have always struggled to gain equality in sport throughout history. Before 1947, people of color were not allowed to play professional baseball. In 1966, predominantly white University of Kentucky played predominantly black Texas Western University for the NCAA basketball championship. In 1972, Congress enacted Title IX to deny sport bias based on gender. Today, women and minorities have proven themselves as coaches and managers, but face a new challenge, breaking into sport management and decision making. Research and common sense suggests that there is a glass ceiling apparent in the business world and in the sport community. Smith and Hattery offer this actuality. The reality is that sport world offers a contrasting reality to a vision of racial harmony. It is an institution that continues to perpetuate lack of integration of cultures. The sport world is set up to perpetuate inequality. Those who are marginalized will continue to be marginalized. Some say sports have not done enough to diversify. And looking at college football, the BCS, 97% of the coaches coaching in the BCS were white. 3% were African American. In professional football, in the early 1990s, Reggie Fowler, a black man, attempted to purchase the Minnesota Vikings. He had gotten together all the money, all the documentation to provide to the NFL to approve purchase. He had even gotten the owner of the Minnesota Vikings to approve the sale to him. Upon a meeting with the NFL, the owners, and the financial staff, none of them showed up to the meeting. Reggie Fowler was not able to purchase the NFL ticket he wanted to buy. Smith and Hattery offer up several ideas for this inequality. The first idea is called the race relations cycle, developed by Professor Robert E. Park in 1939. Professor Park was a teacher at the Chicago School of Sociology. His race relations cycle has four distinct stages: contact, competition, accommodation, and assimilation. The contact phase is when there are two social groups. The competition phase is when there's conflict between the two social groups. The third phase, accommodation, is when one group gains power over the other group. And the fourth phase of assimilation is when a group that has lost the conflict assimilates to the group that's won, to their ways. With this, Park says the assimilation phase that when used in the sport world, that African Americans and women have assimilated to the white way culture of sport. When looking at it today, Roger Goodell and David Stern have forced this race relation cycle onto current NBA and NFL players. They have imposed standards of whiteness for the players. When looking at basketball, players are no longer wear chains on the benches. They must wear a tie and a shirt on the bench. In football, after scoring a touchdown, there are no more end zone celebrations, no more throwing up gang signs. Another theory that they come up with is social distance. Although it has some limitations, Park Relations Cycle provides useful structure and framework for understanding the likely process and potential challenges of integrating racial minorities into the majority culture that pervades sport management. The second thing they look at is social distance. Social distance is into four components: positive and negative stereotyping, the feeling of personal liking and disliking, attitudes and personal policies, and attitudes of social distance. These distinct clarifications that were found problems with Park's thesis have created ways to the, analyze current social and theory development. Emery Bogardus in 1947 came up with the term social distance. He argued that social distance is a function of effective distance between members of two groups. When understanding Bogard's theory of social distance, it is essentially the measure of how much or how little sympathy the members of one group feel towards a member of another group. And applied to sport management and looking at college football, the same white fans who jump up and yell and scream on Saturday afternoons for African American player like John Clay, Denard Robinson, and Terrell Pryor would love them on the field, but would not want them in their home for dinner. And those same people who would not want them over for dinner would not want African Americans moving into their neighborhood, attending the same schools that their kids attend, or socializing and having interracial relationships with African Americans. This theory of social distance is a useful tool in explaining the lack of diversity in leadership in sport. Because why? The institutions of sport management are close-knit fraternities. They have intimate interactions with each other, precisely the same interactions whites do not want to have with African Americans. When applying this to athletic departments, they say it is great to cheer for African Americans on the field and contribute to the school's winning, but are not comfortable in having them in intimate spaces like a golf course or in a fundraising dinner or weekly coaches breakfast. So athletic directors are reluctant to hire African American men in these positions, saying that this idea of social distance is illustrated by Fuzzy Zeller. He's a white male golfer. When Tiger Woods, a professional African American golfer, won his first Masters tournament. In tradition of the Masters, the person who wins the Masters tournament gets to decide dinner for the next year's tournament. Fuzzy Zeller, in leaving the Masters that year, said, "I hope they don't serve fried chicken next year." And also when leaving, said, "or collard greens or whatever else the hell they serve." Smith and Hattery also come up with the race project. Contemporary theorists argue that race is far more complex than which is used in everyday language. Rather than referring to groups of people who look differently from one another, can be distinguished from one another and grouped. For contemporary scholars of race is the status that is imbued with varying levels of power, privilege, disadvantage, and expressed in relationships. And when you conceptualize race as transcendent, one begins to see the importance of maintaining and controlling racial boundaries when relationships are played out. Symbolic racism, a form of racism involving beliefs that a minority group no longer face widespread discrimination, thus deserving the problems or issues they might face due to the fact that they are lazy or simply do not resolve their issues. Symbolic racism has a new style of discrimination by denying access to housing for neighborhoods, blocking financial institutions, the banks and loans, judicial discrimination, and the procedures of sentencing of people of same crime. This type of discrimination will also function in the world of sports of racial minorities and denied access for job announcements, opportunities, information, resources, and promotions, and so forth. Bonilla and Silva also note that colorblindness allows current racist trends to continue unchallenged in America. He likens colorblindness to modern-day Trojan horse, a strategy that allows whites to believe that race is no longer matters because they have the privilege of being oblivious or dismissive to the data that suggests contrary. Colorblind racism, the most significant political tool available for whites, explain and ultimately justify racial status quo, is to keep things the way they are.